Kim's family lives in a crawl space and do what they can to survive every day. Working folding pizza boxes, they go to the bathroom window to steal Wi-Fi and leave the windows open to get their house fumigated for free, even if they have to breathe the smoke. One night they are visited by Min, a friend of young Ki-woo, and he brings them a stone to bring wealth and a proposal. Min is going abroad as an exchange student and wants Ki-woo to replace him as an English tutor for the daughter of a very rich family with the surname Park. Ki-woo knows how to speak English, so he says all he has to do is fake that he went to college, and he won't have a problem because Mrs. Park is very naive. Ki-woo then heads to the Park mansion for an interview. The house is upward-facing in contrast to the Kim's basement, which is downward-facing, giving the message that the rich always go upward and the poor always go downward. They are greeted by the housekeeper named Moon, who has been working in this house since the previous owners. Mrs. Park interviews him and doesn't check his papers. She trusts Min's recommendation. The young man gives a trail lesson to the daughter, Da-hai, and does amazing. He gets hired. At that, he looks like Da-song, the young son who just joined the Boy Scouts. Ki-woo was also one, so he shows understanding. Mrs. Park shows him her son's drawings and tells him that he is a born artist. But they are unable to find a good art teacher. Ki-woo takes advantage and recommends a highly qualified and sought-after friend of a friend who is actually his sister, Ki-jung. The sister introduces herself to Ms. Park, pretending to be an expert in therapeutic art after only reading a few things on the internet. Meanwhile, Ki-woo teaches Da-hai and affection arises between them. Ki-jung gives his trial lesson to the boy and tells Mrs. Park that his drawings refer to an apparent trauma he experienced. The surprised lady tells him that something did happen to her. We later learn what, and Ki-jung is hired. After the class, Mr. Park arrives and offers his driver Yoon to take Ki-jung home. On the way, she gets an idea. She removes her panties and hides them inside the car. Mr. Park finds them, shows them to his wife, and they decide to fire Yoon because they think he's putting women in the car. Then Ki-jung takes the opportunity to recommend him to her uncle's old driver, who is really her dad, Ki-taek. Mr. Kim takes a test drive with Mr. Park and impresses him with his good manners and smooth driving, so he gets hired. The Kim family eats better, but it's not enough. They want to get rid of housekeeper Moon, too. But this woman is cunning, thanks to Da-hai, and they find out that she is allergic to peaches and spray her with peelings without her noticing, making her cough and cough. The driver takes her to the doctor and as part of the plan takes a picture of her to show to Mrs. Park, telling her that she has tuberculosis. And to finish convincing her, Mr. Kim puts tomato sauce on her napkin to make it look like she is coughing up blood, and so she is finally fired. Then Ki-taek takes the opportunity to recommend them a company that is in charge of getting reliable employees. And of course, it's just another trick to get them to hire Mrs. Kim. And this is just what happens. All the Kims were hired by recommendation. The criticism is that success is often determined more by who you know than by your qualifications. Certifications mean nothing but status. Ki-woo and Ki-young could have been very successful if they had left under other conditions. Ki-jung is good with technology and art, and is also a fast learner. Ki-woo speaks very good English and would make a great teacher, but they couldn't pursue it because they didn't have the money to pay for college, and only got the job because he was recommended by his rich friend. It's not about what you know, it's about who you know. The whole Kim family works with the Park family, and the boy Da-song notices that they all smell the same. The Kims know it's because of the basement where they live, and hope that with their new salaries, they will soon be able to get out of there. The next day, the Parks go camping for the boy's birthday, leaving Mrs. Kim to look after the house, and the Kims take the opportunity to enjoy it. Ki-woo says that when Da-hai enters college, he will ask her out. His parents rejoice because this would be the in-laws' house, and fantasize about what it would be like to be rich. Outside, a storm breaks out, and suddenly someone rings the doorbell. It's the former housekeeper Moon, who claims she forgot something in the basement. The Kims hide and Mom Kim lets her in. Moon comes down, but it takes too long, so Mom Kim goes down to see what's going on and discovers that downstairs is a secret bunker created by the previous owner and unknown to the Parks. It turns out that Moon's husband, named Goon, moved in there before the Parks bought the house and has been hiding there for 4 years from loan sharks. All these years, Moon secretly sneaked food to them. She arrives that night to ask their permission so that her husband can continue to live there. Mrs. Kim turns her down and gets ready to talk to the police, but just then her family falls down the stairs while they were spying. Moon realizes that they are family and that they cheated the Parks, so he records them and threatens to show the video to the lady of the house. Now Moon and Gun take control of the situation. Then the Kims rush at them to erase the recording, but at that moment the house phone rings and everyone freezes. It is Mrs. Park asking Mrs. Kim to prepare dinner because they will arrive in 8 minutes, as the storm ruined the camp. As soon as she hangs up, the family gathers everything. They carry a fainting Moon and Gyun to the basement and finally hide wherever they can. The Parks arrive, Mrs. Kim serves dinner, Moon wakes up and runs upstairs, but Mother Kim pushes her back down, and as she falls, she hits her head. Joan finds himself banging his head against the light switches, sending a message for help in Morse code. As Da Song is a Boy Scout, he hopes that someday he will see his message for help. Mr. Kim finds this idea ridiculous, so far. Upstairs, Mrs. Park tells Mother Kim about Da Song's trauma. One night, the boy sneaked into the kitchen to steal his birthday cake and saw a ghost coming out of the basement, which was just Gyun. This caused him to have seizures, and when they happen, they have very little time to take him to the hospital. And that is also why they don't spend his birthday at home. The Parks retire to their rooms, and the Kims get ready to leave. But suddenly, Da Song comes down because he wants to camp out in the garden in the rain. The Kims immediately hide under the table, and to their bad luck, the Parks decide to spend the night on the sofa next door to keep an eye on their son. Lying down, Mr. Park notices a strange smell and says that this is how Mr. Kim smells, that it is a smell emanating from everyone who uses the subway. The Parks finally sleep and the Kims leave the house, running in the rain downstairs back to their apartment, which they find completely flooded. Like rats, they scurry back to the flooded and garbage-filled sewers. They rescue some belongings, including the Stone of Plenty. Mr. Kim says goodbye to his home in tears, and the family spends the night in a shelter without a plan to resolve the situation. Meanwhile, in the bunker, Moon dies from the blow he took when he fell. The next day, Mrs. Park throws an impromptu party for her son Da Song's birthday. Mrs. Kim has to cook and set up tables. Ki Taek carries Mrs. Park around for supplies, as he hears her say that the rain was a blessing, the same blessing that caused the Kims and many more to lose everything. This reveals how sometimes the upper classes become blind to harsh realities faced by the underprivileged, and after saying that, he finishes off by grimacing at the smell of Mr. Kim, who makes a priceless face. Back at the party, Mr. Park and Mr. Kim dress up as Indians to give Da Song a show. Ki Taek doesn't look happy at all. Meanwhile, Ki Woo and Ki Jung are also invited to the party. The young man has a hot time with Da Hai. He takes the Stone of Plenty to give it to Moon and Gyun to make passes, but he doesn't know that she died. As Gyun goes down, Gaon knocks him out with his same stone. Then Gyun comes out of the basement, grabs a knife, and seeking to avenge his wife, stabs Ki Jung. Da Song faints because he is the ghost. Mr. Kim approaches his wounded daughter and sees Da Hai carrying his other wounded son. At that, Mr. Park yells at him to go get the car to take Da Song to the hospital. And Ki Tak doesn't want to leave his family, so he throws him the car keys. But they fall on the lawn. The poor compete with each other for the chance to get some leftovers from the rich, just as the rich betray each other for their own interests. It's not just rich against poor, it's everyone and their interests. Being a parasite is not a class issue. It's an issue of seeing others as objects, as obstacles, or as means to obtain personal benefits. At that, Mrs. Kim stabs Jeon with a skewer and he falls on the keys. Mr. Park goes to retrieve them, but even during that moment of emergency, he covers his nose. It is a smell that is born of place and circumstances in which you live, a smell that you are the fruit of, not the creator of, a smell that reminds them that it smells like their basement, a smell that they cannot escape because no matter how hard they have tried to live a better life, it haunts them wherever they go. The Parks repel the smell because they believe they must remind the Kims of their place in the world, that they belong to the places they come from. Ki Taek, fed up, takes the knife and kills him. Then, bewildered, he runs away. Sometime later, Ki-woo wakes up in the hospital, but his brain is affected. He can't stop laughing. He laughs when he learns that his sister is dead and his father is missing, and laughs when he and his mother are put on trial for the crimes they committed. He only stops laughing until the news shows the Park's house empty. Faced with the undeniable, cruel reality that there is, sometimes we can only laugh until we cry. Sometime later, the news is no longer relevant. Ki-woo climbs a mountain and spies the mansion, which is now occupied by other owners. He sees the lights flickering. He was a Boy Scout too, so he notices it's a message. It's about his father. All that time, he's been hiding in the basement. He buried Moon in the garden and survived by sneaking into the kitchen every night for food, and sends messages in Morse every day, hoping his son will see them someday. From back in the old apartment, Ki-woo dreams of working hard and getting enough money to someday buy the house and reunite with his father. The fantasy of social mobility is Ki-woo's fantasy. It's nice to think that he could get rich and buy the house to set his father free, but that will never happen. The film is somewhat pessimistic about the future, arguing that those who are born poor will die poor, while those who are rich will die rich. Many countries in the Americas reveal an inequality of opportunity. Here, people's progress depends more on the socioeconomic status of their home of origin than on effort. 80 out of every 100 Americans who are born poor die poor. As we must not blind ourselves to the problems of the underprivileged, we must think of ways to expand and equalize opportunities for all in order to increase economic mobility and build fairer societies.